welcome back to Reflecting Redemption. Today is all about artisan sourdough bread and how I make the simplest, easiest, and most delicious loaf of artisan sourdough bread. I'm going to share all of it with you today, all of my secrets, and exactly how I do it. So I hope you'll enjoy it. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the like button if you like this video, and that will also save it for you so you can come back and rewatch it if you're wanting to attempt to make this bread. So come and join me in my kitchen today. I never thought I was the type of person who would learn to make bread. I think a lot of times we sell ourselves short and we don't believe in ourselves when we should, because I have mastered this, and if I can do it, anyone can. So join me today as we make some bread. So to begin with baking any sourdough-based bread or product, you are going to need sourdough starter. So we are starting today with sourdough starter, and we are going to feed it first thing so that it can get a nice rise and get bubbly. I started my starter about a year ago now, and it is doing really well. It takes maintenance, and I will link in the description below the Farmhouse on Boone playlist where I got this information and how I started my sourdough starter, so that you can start your own if you would like. You can also buy them and get dehydrated versions. The most important thing to know about sourdough is that it is fermented flour and water. It is left at room temperature or stored in the fridge for a week at a time. It needs to be fed daily if left at room temperature, and it needs to be fed weekly if left in the refrigerator. What I do when I want to bake bread is I get it out, I feed it depending on the quantity that's there. You always want to feed it a 1-to-1 ratio, unbleached all-purpose flour, and filtered water. Anything that contains bleach, chlorine in it, is going to kill the bacteria in the sourdough, and that is the yeast that makes everything rise and it makes the bread. So you cannot use anything with chlorine or bleach in it. You can use the King Arthur's unbleached all-purpose flour and just your filtered water. I use mine right from my refrigerator. There are better filters out there that will help get more of the chlorine out, but I'm going to start by getting the water ready for the bread. The sourdough starter has risen, it is bubbling, and we are ready. It's been about 4 hours. I'm taking 1 1/4 cup of water, placing it in the microwave for 45 seconds. Now I'm going to lay out everything that I need to bake bread. Unbleached all-purpose flour, sourdough starter that's been fed, warm filtered water, olive oil, and then salt. And then of course you need your bowl, your tea towel, your whisk, your spoon, and your measuring cup. So I have all the materials that I need ready to make my bread. You're going to start with 1 cup of sourdough starter that is active and bubbly. A good way to mark how active and bubbly your starter is to make a little mark on your jar before you feed your starter, and then watch it grow and make a mark about 3 hours later to see how much it's risen. You want it to double in size. So I'm going to put this cup of sourdough starter into my glass bowl. And what's important is that you're working here with warm ingredients. I put the starter on the back of my stove where it was nice and warm for it to get a good rise, and I'm adding warm filtered water, not cold, because breads love warm ingredients, not hot, but warm. So I started with the 1 1/4 cup of water and my cup of active sourdough starter, and now I'm going to slowly start adding my unbleached all-purpose flour to my mixture. I start with 1 cup, and recently I have started sifting my flour. This is an option. I did not do it in this video, but I do sift my flour from time to time because it gives it a nice light and airy crust and inside to your bread. So this is what the mixture looks like after 1 cup of flour. You can see the bubbles, and you can see it's a nice loose batter. It kind of resembles pancake batter. So we're going to slowly incorporate more flour into this batter and make it into bread. So go at this about a cup at a time. You want to go all the way up to almost 4 cups. Your bread will tell you when it's done receiving flour. So like I said, 1 cup at a time, and I switch from my whisk to my wooden spoon to try to stir this together. The dough starts to get a bit sticky and then a bit shaggy after you go through these first couple of steps. Here I'm going to give it a vigorous stir so that I can get things off the side of the bowl and start to incorporate it. And you can see how thick it is becoming. It is looking more like dough and less like pancake batter now, but it could definitely use another cup. So if you're counting, I've used 2 cups of flour and now it's time for the 3rd cup. On some days I find that 3 to 3.5 cups is plenty. On other days I find that 4 to 4.5 cups is what I need. It all depends on the weather, the hydration of your starter, and how things are going in your bowl. There's a lot of science behind it, but don't ask me about the science. Alright, so at this point I've added 3 cups of flour and I want to add in 2 teaspoons of salt. I'm using kosher salt, but I would suggest that you add this in at the very beginning after your first cup of flour so that it's not difficult to incorporate and it gives it time to absorb. So now I'm going to go through and gently fold in the salt and the flour and let it slowly hydrate. The important thing here is not to think quick and done. It's to think slowly incorporate these things so that they become one. You can see my shaggy dough and it's about time for the best part, which is a little bit of kneading. It's not bad. You're going to, in just a moment, flour your surface and turn out the sourdough bread and start to form it into a ball of dough. I really enjoy this part. I like being hands-on. I find that it keeps me out of my head and just helps me to focus on the task at hand. I find it very relaxing and enjoyable. So I'm going to take all of this shaggy dough and start to make it into something that is an actual loaf of Artisan sourdough bread, which is pretty cool. So I kept this in real time so that you could watch how the stretching and folding goes and the way that I do it. Now I'm no way perfect at this, but I have very much found it enjoyable and we really enjoy the bread that comes at the end. So I thought you might enjoy the process that I use because it's very intuitive and a lot less measuring and exact. It's much more going by a feeling of the dough in your hand. So what I've found is that I want to lightly take the dough and knead the flour into it. And mainly the last cup of flour that you use is what I lightly knead into the bread. So I will stir in at least 3 cups. And then for the 4th cup, I will let the bread do the talking. So essentially that means if the bread is receiving the flour, then I will keep giving it the flour that's on the surface. And if it receives all of it and is still quite sticky, I will give it more. But your bread will talk for you. It will tell you when it is done receiving flour, and it will tell you when it is gone too far, so you have to be careful. You don't want to overwork flour. If your bread is not receiving any more flour, then it is probably done. It could get sticky a little later on, but you could always dust it with a bit more flour. Just have to be careful not to overdo it. You can always add more, but you can't take it away. So I'm listening to my bread right now and taking it easy as I work it with my hands. I find this is the best way to know what your bread needs. And like I said, that changes from day to day and from time to time. There are no 2 loaves that ever go exactly the same. So I'm going to dust my hands off here in a moment so that I can check how sticky the dough is. Sometimes it can give you a false idea if you've got all the dough on your hands as well. So I want to get a cleaner hand and I can check and see how sticky my sourdough bread loaf is. It's not feeling super sticky, but a little bit. If it sticks to your surface at all, or if you feel your hand sticking and pulling dough away, you know that you probably need to add some more flour. But this one is almost done, and I'm going to prep all of my materials to get it to rest. So essentially what you do after everything is combined, you clean up the bowl that you're going to use if you're using the same bowl that you mixed all your ingredients in, and you get it ready to receive the sourdough bread. You don't want the bits and pieces left over. So I'm going to take a bit of olive oil and rub that around the bowl. You could also use cooking spray or butter, something like that, but something to keep it from sticking to the bowl. And then the bread is going to go into the bowl with a tea towel over it, a nice warm, moist tea towel. And the bread is going to sit for 30 minutes. It's It's going to hydrate, it's going to rest, and then we're going to start stretching and folding the dough, which adds air and lightness, and it really helps everything come together. So before I go any further, I'm going to clean up, and I wanted to share this tip. Use your dough scraper or your vegetable scraper, whatever you have, to clean your counters. It makes it so much simpler. Then you're going to add the tea towel over the bowl and let your dough rest for at least 30 minutes. I like to set a timer because I can get a little absent-minded and I don't want to forget about my dough. So after 30 minutes, I open it up and I begin the stretch and folds. Now I want to let you know that for the purpose of this video, I have laid the dough out on the surface so that you can watch the stretching and folding. I typically don't do this many stretch and folds. I usually just do about 3 to 5, and I don't overwork the dough. Now this dough turned out really good, but I am stretching and folding just a little bit more so that you can see. I'm also testing it to see if my hands stick to the dough, and they did, so I needed to add a little bit more flour. I only go in about a tablespoon at a time or a little hand sprinkle, and then I can add more on the next stretch and fold round if I want to. So that is the first series of stretch and folds done. I'm going to cover it back up with a tea towel and now set the clock for 15 minutes. And you'll notice on this series of stretch and folds that you can see through the dough when you pull it up. So I really wanted to highlight that here in this clip. This is called the window pane test. If the dough is doing well and what it's supposed to do, you should be able to stretch out a nice piece of it, and without it tearing or ripping, you can see the sun shining through it. It's very fascinating to me, and it's a sign that your dough is doing what it's supposed to do. So we're going to stretch and fold 3 times. I'm going to lay the dough out again. I don't typically do this, but I want you to see it. I want you to see that window pane test is being passed. It's doing great. And now I'm going to fold all these layers back into each other to create air in the dough. I like to make mine into the shape of a ball at this point to note that it is coming together, and I once again am testing it for stickiness. If I find that it's a bit sticky, I will add around a tablespoon of flour and just lightly pat it and put it back into the bowl so the flour can absorb and it won't be quite as sticky. But I noted that the bread was good this time, so I'm just going to put it back in the bowl. Re-grease if you find that your bowl is starting to let your dough stick. Cover it back up with your tea towel. You're going to set your timer for another 15 minutes and then come back and you're going to stretch and fold again. So this time I decided to do it of a quicker pace for you all because I know it might be getting a little bit dense. But here we are on our 3rd time, stretching and folding, which is one of my favorite parts. It's super fun. And then you're going to put it back in your bowl. Let it rest for another 15 minutes. I found my dough was quite sticky here. I added a little bit of flour, and you can already see the bubbles are starting to form. 15 more minutes has come and gone, and now we are going to stretch and fold for the last time. It may seem like a lot of time, but it's actually not. If you set yourself little timers, if you're at home, it's easy to just come back to it, quickly stretch it and fold it and cover it back up. I always find that on a day at home, it's pretty simple to get it done, and it's a lot of fun. So now I'm going to cover this. I got this beeswax wrap from my sister. It's so cute, and it does a really good job of holding in the moisture. So at this point, you want to cover it with plastic wrap, beeswax wrap, a lid, whatever you've got, and stick it in an airtight place like a microwave or an oven that's not been turned on in a while, and let the dough rest and rise. This is going to take about 6 hours. I'm noting the time here, it's 4:35. I'm going to check on it every few hours. I think I let it rise about 4 hours this time. It could have gone 6 to 8. You can go all the way to 24 hours, but I noticed by about 8:30, 9 o'clock, it had doubled and was ready to go into the fridge. So here the dough has doubled. I'm going to take it out and let you see the bubbles that have started to form, which is really great. And then I'm going to cover it up, put a lid on it so that it's super airtight, and stick it in the fridge overnight. I got this tip from Farmhouse on Boone. She said that it would help with the scoring of the bread the next day, and it definitely does. Scoring is not my strong suit still, but I find it quite fun. So it's the next morning now, and I'm setting my oven to 450. This is a note for you. I have recently found that my oven has changed, and I need to bake my bread at 425 for 30 minutes with the lid on and 30 minutes with the lid off. Of course, this is in the Dutch oven. So you might find also that your oven is a little more particular. Perhaps your oven does better at 450 for 20 minutes with the lid on and 20 minutes with the lid off. That is the original recipe and the original instructions. But for me, I had to lower my temperature and increase my time because my dough was not getting done in the middle. If you have a kitchen thermometer, the best thing you can do when the bread is done baking is take it and stick it right into the middle, and you can tell if your bread is done because it should be around 190 degrees Fahrenheit. So look at this fridge rise, look at the bubbles that I got. I pinched together the sides on the bottom, and I'm going to score it now. I've got it on parchment paper, and I'm going to add some dusting of unbleached all-purpose flour to the top of the bread, and that gives it this wonderful crust and this beautiful look to it. I'm doing a little wheat pattern. I'm not great at these, but I find it really fun, and the bread tastes good no matter what your scoring looks like, so I can keep practicing that. I'm going to dust it with the unbleached all-purpose flour now, and then I'm going to bake it. After I did the self-clean on my oven, my temperature really changed, and I found that I had a loaf that was doughy, so that's when I made my temperature adjustment. But you'll notice on this loaf, I am baking it at 450 for 20 minutes with the lid on and 20 minutes with the lid off. Like I said, you might need to experiment with this and see what you can get out of your oven and how your range runs. At this point, my Dutch oven has been inside of my oven as it preheated with the lid on to create a nice hot surface in the Dutch oven to put the bread on. This will give you your wonderful crispy crust. I'm ready to put my dough in on the parchment paper. Do not forget this part. It will stick and be a terrible mess. Do not use wax paper. It will melt and burn and be a terrible mess. So I've put my dough into my cast iron Dutch oven, and I'm going to put it back into the stove where it's going to bake for 20 minutes. Then I'll remove the lid when it's had a nice rise, and now it's going to bake again to give it a good crispy crust. Now it's time for the reveal, this beautiful loaf of Artisan sourdough bread. Look at the ear that I got. I'm so pleased. The flour makes it so pretty. I wish you could hear the crunch of the air bubbles inside of the bread. It's just lovely. I sit it on this rack to let it cool, and then I'm going to take it and slice it and cover it in butter, which is the best way to have it. Also use the bread for sandwiches, croutons. I love to take them and make breadcrumbs when we've used all of the loaf that we wanted to eat on. You can make French toast and anything that you use bread for. It is absolutely delicious. I hope you will give this a try, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again really soon. Bye.